friends. Welcome to a Sunday service with Red Deer Lake United Church. My name is Nick. I am the minister here, and we are an affirming church that gratefully gathers on Treaty 7 land. And what we are all about is finding in the way of Jesus this new way of being human and alive in this world. This way that's connected to God, each other, and ourselves. This way of life that's rooted in those spiritual practices of spirituality, community, hospitality, justice, and compassion. This way of life that transforms us so we can go out and help transform the world, turning it into one where everybody is enough and everyone has a place. Yeah, that is who we are. That is what we are all about. That is what we think Jesus is all about. And this is our Sunday service. This is a thing we do each and every week, both in person and online, that helps us become those kinds of people. That roots us in those practices, that gives us what we need to keep on going, keep on becoming human, becoming the kinds of people that God calls us to be. People of light, life, and love. And so I am so happy that you are here for this. Thank you for joining us. Whoever you are, wherever you come from, whatever time it is, may you know that you are in the right place and that here with us you are welcome, you are wanted, and you are accepted just as you are. And we are so glad that you've joined us on this journey. So if you are watching us live on Sunday morning, over here in the chat box, you can find it somewhere on this side of the screen. Let us know who you are. Let us know how you're doing. Check in with us. This is such a wonderful way for us to be that community of diversity and inclusion and affirmation. This community that does life together. So go check in on that. But if that's not your jam, that is cool. Just do you. Because that's what really matters, right? That's what we want you to do, is just show up as you are. Be open to that Spirit who makes all things new, and let her do her thing. And we're going to begin our service with this. We're going to start with a psalm to help us finish arriving. And Psalms, if you don't know what those are those prayers, those songs, those meditations. You can find them in the middle of the Bible. And what they are, these expressions of not only the height and depths of our humanity, but also the very heart of our faith. They are these things that remind us that we can go to God with anything that we're feeling. Both our joys and our light and our heartfelt prayers of gratitude, but also our rants, our anger, and our wrath. And God will accept it all with love, compassion, and kindness. Yeah, there are these beautiful parts of our faith. I think we should all read them a bit more than we do. But the one we're going to start with reminds us of a truth at the heart of our faith. That God is good. And that God is always with us and for us. And so as we listen to this psalm, I invite you to breathe deep. I invite you to choose to be here and let in that Spirit who makes all things new. And so my friends, as we begin our time together, may peace be with you.
You are sovereign, clothed with goodness, dressed in strength. And so the world is firmly established, and it cannot be moved. You, addressed by the world's voice, are firmly established from the first, and before and after the first. The rivers have been lifted, the river's cries, the river's shouts have been lifted. The rivers have lifted their dark waves, but more than the thunder of the waters, more than the thumping of the seas, is you. Your witnessing is steadfast. Your house is ever whole, even past the end of time.
Abide with me, fast falls the eventide. The darkness deepens, Lord, with me abide. When other helpers fail and comforts flee, help of the helpless, oh, abide with me.
Swift to risk those and out life's little
joys rosy and its glories pass away. Change and decay all around I see. O Christ, who changes not, abide with me. Abide with me. Abide with me. O Christ, who changes not, abide with me. I need your presence every passing hour. What but your grace can foil the tempter's power? Who like yourself, my guidance, take and lead. Through cloud and sunshine, oh, abide with me. I have no fear with you at hand to bless. Ills have no weight and tears no bitterness. Where is death's sting, where grave your victory? I triumph still if you abide with me. Abide with me. Abide with me. O Christ, who changes not, abide with me. Before my closing eyes, shine through the gloom and point me to the skies. Hands morning great and earth's vain shadows flee. In life, in death, O Lord, abide with me. Abide with me.
What have I changed my mind about? Let's That's a hard question.
Maybe I'm really set in my ways. I don't know. I can't think of anything.
I changed my mind about wasting all of the money I have and buying just toys.
The way that I look at boys, I've come to realize that you can't just judge somebody on their appearance.
I used to like princesses, but now I don't. Well, I kind of still do, but...
Road raging. I don't road rage anymore.
Fake suntanning.
Wearing sunscreen.
Politics. Donald Trump.
Spirits, like the afterlife.
Country music.
Women.
I used to be John Lennon all the way, and recently I'm now a Paul fan.
I used to think that people couldn't change, that who you were at the beginning is who you really were at the end of the day, and I don't think that that's true anymore.
I've started eating meat again. It's delicious, and I'm kind of like, why haven't I been doing this the whole time?
Olives, I find them gross again. I go back and forth.
When I was 5, I really wanted to be a singer when I grew up, but then I changed my mind.
What do you want to be now?
An actor.
The biggest thing I changed was my acceptance of people who have a different sexual orientation than I do.
I've changed my mind about caring about the world. I want the world to be as good as possible for my generation and the generations to come.
There was a time when I used to think to myself, I don't want to make it to 100. But now I really want to see what the other side of 100 looks like.
I've stopped caring what other people thought. Not enough time for you to get what you want to get done, and at the same time worry that it looks right, or is it okay, or was it perfect enough? It's just, you gotta just do it.
I used to think it was sort of a virtue to be able to stay angry at someone and remember all the wrongs that they've done to you, but I think life is too short to be like that. So I've been trying to just let go a lot.
Such a good question, right? What have you changed your mind about recently? And we're asking that here in church because that's a really spiritual question. Because part of our spirituality is transformation. It's becoming holy, which doesn't mean perfect, but it means people who are so different, they stand out. People who are so generous, so gracious, so loving, so compassionate. They're unlike anything people have ever experienced. Yeah, that's the life that Jesus calls us into. That's who God calls us to be. People who are people of light, life, and love. And to do that, we have to learn how to change our minds. We have to learn that that's a good thing, that that's a beautiful thing, that that's an okay thing. And so I want to spend some time talking about what we've changed our minds about. Because not only does that help normalize it and help us understand that this is a good thing to do, it lets us do it together. It lets us do it in community because let's face it, changing our minds, learning, doing things differently, it's really hard. It's not comfortable. But when we do it together, I think it's there we can find the encouragement, the strength, maybe even a few tips to help us do it well and always be people who are growing, evolving, and changing our minds on things so we can become the kinds of people God calls us to be. And so some questions for you. Rumble with them on your own, or maybe here in the chat or with your family. What have you changed your mind about before? What was that like? What's something that you are rumbling with now? Do you have any tips on how to do it? And why is that important? Why even bother? Do you have a story about changing your mind where you realize, holy smokes, why didn't I do this earlier? Life is so much better now that I've made this change and I see things this way. And so I turn it over to you. Do it on your own, on the chat with your family, but as you do it, let's just spend some time talking about it, and may grace be with us. God be with you. So there is a story that's in the Bible. You can find it in 3 different places. Yeah, that's right. The same story, 3 different places. Matthew, Mark, and Luke all tell it. Which tells us something, right? Yeah, it tells us that this is a good story. And not in the sense that this story is riveting or will leave you on the edge of your seats, but rather it tells us that this is an important story. That people saw in this story something that needs to be passed down, that it's got something to say, that it's got some wisdom inside of it. And so people would keep telling it. And they would keep telling it until someone wrote it down, and those people would keep writing it down until we're here today, 2,000 years later, still talking about it. Which is why we read these things, right? We don't read these things because the Bible floated down from heaven on a Ziploc bag and angels kind of said, read these stories. No, we don't read it because of that. We read these stories. We call these stories sacred because people have had for thousands of years found within them these ancient truths, these universal bits of wisdom, these things that draw us into the presence of God and into what it means to be human and alive in this world. That's why we read these stories. And this story is no different. This story also draws us into some universal truths about how we can be human and live a life connected with God, each other, and ourselves. And in this particular story, we're told that Jesus and the disciples are coming out of the temple in Jerusalem. And now the temple was way more than just a place of worship, or even the biggest place of worship. The temple for them was this symbol of their identity, their place in the world, and also their history and their future. For them, the temple was this place where they thought God lived. And they would go there to commune with God, and it symbolized that they had a relationship. That they were the chosen people and that God had given them this land that they could live on. And because it symbolized that, it also symbolized this sense of hope and resilience that they could have. That even though that they were under the thumb and occupation of the Roman Empire, that God was still with them, that God was still their God. They were still God's people, and that one day God would free them from oppression. And because it symbolized all of that, it also symbolized how they believed the world worked. That God was ultimately in control. That God had a plan for the future. That all of this was going somewhere. And as long as they were in good standing with God, all would be okay. Yeah, the temple symbolized all of that. Big, big deal, right? And so, of course, the temple had to look the part. It was this huge, massive, beautiful building made out of these stones. Now get this. It was made out of these stones that were 40 by 40 feet. Each would weigh a few tons. Massive, massive stones. And there's even one stone that's still left today. It weighs 660 tons. Yeah, 660 tons. And because that is just like a ridiculously high number, it's so heavy, it's kind of incomprehensible for us. Here's how heavy that is. That stone is 8.5 times heavier than a spaceship. Yeah, 8.5 times heavier than a spaceship. It's 5.5 times heavier than a blue whale. Massive, massive stones. And our history records tell us that these stones were made in this quarry about a mile away from where the temple is. And thousands upon thousands of ox and people dragged it a mile in order to build the temple. Yeah, huge, ridiculous, crazy, beautiful, massive building. All of it meant to symbolize their faith, their relationship with God. All of it meant to embody how they understood the world to work and what their faith was about. And so the disciples and Jesus, they're leaving that building. And so as the disciples walk out, not only are these small town boys kind of in awe of the architecture of it all, that humans built this thing, they're also in awe and captivated by what it all means and represents. And in our story, we're told they turn to Jesus and they tell him, like, have you seen all this stuff? Look at these huge stones. Isn't this amazing? Look at what all this means. And Jesus, he turns to them and he says, all that you see, all these buildings, all these stones, they will not last. Soon they'll be on the ground. All of this will fall. It's all coming down. And hear me when I say this, that will be just the beginning. Yeah. And we can only imagine how the disciples would react to that. Because not only is what Jesus is saying almost incomprehensible to imagine that all of this is going to come down, it's going to be on the ground, but it would also mean for them that everything that they believed, the way the world worked, what their faith was about, it would mean that is wrong. That's going to fall away. That's going to come down too. What they would hear Jesus saying to them is that the world is about to end. That God wasn't in charge. That the land God had given them, that actually wasn't theirs. That those promises God gave you, no, those don't mean anything. That you're not special, you're not chosen, you're just nobodies. There's no hope for liberation. There's no future. It's not going to change. Everything is coming to an end. The universe is going to stop. Yeah, that's what they would hear Jesus saying. And looking to Jesus as if he might be joking, looking for some reassurance, Jesus says, yep, not one stone will be left. Now, there is a word for these kinds of stories, and that word is apocalypse. I think some of us might be familiar with that one. It's a word that when we hear it, we think of movies with aliens and asteroids and sharknadoes and zombies. Or maybe for you, it's a word that conjures up images of the book of Revelation and stories within that about 4 horsemen and fire and floods and destruction. But regardless of what we think, whatever comes to mind, we end up thinking about this thing that will one day happen that will cause the end of the world. Right? Yeah, that's what we think about when we think of apocalypse. But the truth is, that's not what the word means. We've got apocalypse all wrong. When we talk about apocalypse, we're not talking about the end of the world. We're talking about the end of a world. We're not talking about the end of everything. We're talking about the end of something. It's not something that will happen one day in the future far from now, but rather something that will happen now. When we talk about apocalypse, we're talking about those moments when everything shifts. We're talking about those moments we can't come back from. We're talking about those moments when something breaks, stops, or vanishes, and the world becomes fundamentally different. We're talking about those moments when you see something in yourself or maybe around you and you realize you can't unsee it and suddenly everything becomes different. Yeah, that's apocalypse. It's a word for those paradigm shifting moments in our lives. It's not a way to understand something that will one day happen, but a way to understand things that happen now. It's a way to understand a very human, universal experience. We're talking those moments about death. We're talking about divorce and the end of relationships. We're talking loss. We're talking paradigm shifts. We're talking pandemic. We're talking disillusionment. We're talking betrayal. We're talking about those insights that blow our boxes apart. We're talking about those endings that we experience as humans. Yeah, that's what we talk about when we talk about apocalypse. And I'm sure you know those things, right? Anyone know what I'm talking about? Viewed that way, we all know apocalypse. We all know those kinds of endings. And that's what's going on in this story. The disciples are hearing from Jesus that their world, that everything they knew, that everything they understood, that everything they've experienced, it's all going to come crashing down. That they are about to experience an apocalypse. And it's right there. It's right there that we discover why this story is important and why we're still talking about it. Because it lets us in on this universal truth and universal experience. That apocalypses happen. That we will in our lives and our world experience the ending of things. That we will go through these huge foundational rifts that will tear apart parts of ourselves and parts of our world. That everything can and will change. That it will come crashing down, sometimes slowly, sometimes abruptly, sometimes by choice, sometimes by force, but regardless, worlds do end. Yeah. And we know this. We've lived through this. But maybe some of us need to hear this today. Maybe for you today, there's some liberation in that. That, oh, okay, this happens. This ending that I'm experiencing, this is normal. Okay, I thought it was just happening to me. I thought I was alone in this. Yeah, maybe you need to hear that. But if that's what apocalypse is, it kind of changes how we approach it, right? Because if apocalypse is universal, if these things do happen, our question isn't how do we stop it or how do we avoid it, but rather our question becomes how do we survive it? How do we make it through an apocalypse? What are the things that we can do to choose to let things die and change so we can be here on the other side? Because it is a choice, right? That is the rub of it all. When apocalypses happen, when endings do come, we have a choice to make. Do we stay and end with it? Or do we find the courage and the resilience and the hope to step forward into whatever is next? Yeah. And so because we do have a choice to make, and because that choice is really hard, today we're going to have 3 rules for surviving the apocalypse. 3 things that we can each do that can help us find that hope, resilience, and courage to stay alive as everything falls apart around us. And so the first rule of the apocalypse. One of the things that we will be tempted to do when we experience the end of things is to think about all that we've lost, to long for how things used to be. Right? And of course it is. That's a very normal human reaction. That's grief. That's a good thing to attend to. That's a good thing to spend some time doing. But what the first rule of the apocalypse will tell us is not to stay there, but rather to do all that, but then take some time to look up and look within. To look up and look within and see what's actually there. Because here's where we need to remember that original meaning, that true meaning of the word apocalypse. That's not the ending of everything, but the ending of some things. That it's not the ending of all of us, but only parts of us. That it's not the world ending, but it's a world that's ending. And the reason we need to take some time to look up and within is to see what's still there. To see what new world has risen. To see what's been uncovered within us. To take some time to see this new reality that's in us and around us. And see there, as Jesus told the disciples, that this isn't the end. That everything isn't coming to a stop, but this is just the beginning. And it's here we remember the truth at the very heart of our faith. That resurrection happens. That the worst thing is never the last thing. That every ending is a new beginning. And the first rule to surviving an apocalypse is to look up and look within so we can see that this is true. That this is a new beginning. That the worst thing hasn't happened. That despite how it felt, as crazy and violent as it may have been, despite what was lost, there is still something here. The story keeps going on. A new world, a new life is rising up before you. So when things do fall, honor it, lament it, grieve it, but make sure you do look up. Make sure you do take some time to look within and see what is still there. To see what's been uncovered and find the life and world that is now waiting for you to step into it. Yeah, rule number 1. And rule number 2, go slow. Go slow. Sometimes when we experience the ending of things, the thing we want to do, and I think we're experiencing this right now as we head back or head out of this pandemic, really, is that we want to rush ahead and figure it all out. We want to make a plan. We want to be strategic. We want to be proactive. And we want to get everything in its place. Right? Yeah, and of course we do. That's a pretty normal trauma response when everything falls apart. But the second rule we have to remember is, as Debbie Thomas teaches, we need to go slow. When everything falls apart and we step into this new thing that is here, we need to go slow. Which means to avoid making hasty and knee-jerk judgments and reactions, to avoid being too quick to make plans and decisions, but to choose to be patient, to choose to be discerning, to be prayerful, to be imaginative, to be open. And we need to go slow because that helps us avoid doing the one thing we can never do when we experience an apocalypse. And that's rebuild what's been torn down. That's to go back to the way things were. That's to undo the resurrection that we just experienced. Going slow, not rebuilding things back up, not going back to the way they were, makes time for us to ask some really essential questions that will help us survive an apocalypse. And that's questions like, what's required of me here? What new path do I need to go down? Where do I need to divert my energy? It allows us to ask, what do I need to leave in the rubble? What needs to stay here? What's garbage now? What needs to be left behind? What do I need to say thank you to, but I don't need you anymore? And what do I need to pick up? What new narratives, what new passions, what new goals, what new habits can I enter into? What's required of me in this time, in this place, in this chapter of my life? Yeah, huge, important questions that can help us not only survive, but thrive after the apocalypse. So go slow, rule number 2. And rule number 3, finally, the third rule to surviving an apocalypse: ask for help. Ask for help. And usually our apocalypses are going to feel super personal. They're going to be these things that are happening within us in the most intimate of places and over the most intimate and beloved of things. But the rub is, despite that, we can't survive them on our own. The only way to survive an apocalypse is to ask for help. The only way to make it through is to go to people who love us and know us and say, hey, this is happening. This is what I'm going through. And the thing that will happen is there in asking for help and being courageous and vulnerable will not only be seen and cared for and encouraged, but will discover hope. Because other people will say, hey, that happened to me actually. Something similar went on in my life and I know how it feels. And here's how I handled it. Here's how I made it through, and I know that you can make it too. Yeah, simply by asking for help, we'll find hope. Because we learn that this happens to others. And they made it through, so we can too, and we can come together to build something beautiful out of what has risen up before us. Yeah, third rule, ask for help. And so as we finish up, let's end with this. If you are in the middle of an apocalypse, if your world is crumbling around you, remember these rules. That resurrection happens, so look up, look within you and see the new things that are rising up. Go slow, don't rush, take your time, and ask for help. And if you're here today and you've made it through some apocalypses, if you survived yourself, tell your story. Let people know that you made it through to the other side and they can too. But either way, may we not give in to fear. May we not give in to despair. May we not give in to devastation when it all comes crumbling down, but may we hold on to hope. That God is bigger than those things that are falling down, that we are bigger than those things that are falling down. And the worst thing will never be the last thing, that resurrection will always happen. And if we go slow, and if we ask for help, we will make it through to the other side. And to that, my friends, we say, Amen. So let us pray. loving mystery. Here we are. People who are full of things that are taking up space within us, that occupy our thoughts and our energy. People who are full of these things like joy and worry and gratitude, but also resentment, fear, and love. We take some time right now to offer them all to you, to name them, to turn them into prayers, asking for your Spirit to embrace them all and move. Whether that's through answering them, or rejoicing with us, or simply lamenting alongside of us, we ask that you hear these prayers and that you do move, bringing some hope to despair, some peace to chaos, some rest to busyness, and some love to fear. So God, we start with a deep breath, knowing that you are like the air that we breathe in. And we empty our prayers out to you, saying, Spirit, may you hear these prayers. And so God, we offer these prayers to you in the beautiful, in the liberating, in the wondrous name of Jesus by saying together, Amen. All right, friends, that is everything for this week. Thank you for being here. Thank you for doing this with us. Our hope and our prayer, as always, is that you leave here different, maybe a bit more alive than when you came in, maybe more liberated, maybe chewing on a really good question. But in any case, we hope that you leave with lots of grace, love, and peace. If you want to continue these conversations, if you picked up what we put down today and you're like, yes, this is what I needed to chew on, I need to talk about this some more, you are in luck. Just click the link below. That will take you to our Zoom call that will happen in just a couple of minutes. And there you can find lots of really good people to carry on this conversation, to check in about what you felt during this, to talk about what you thought, to answer any questions. Just a good time of continuing the work. So go click on that. That will start in just a couple minutes. If you are enjoying what we're doing, if this is making an impact on your life, if you believe we need more hope, joy, peace, and love in the world, we need more meaning and purpose and connection, we'd love for you to support our work. There is a link below that will take you to our webpage, and you can donate to our church. You can make one-off payments, you can make monthly payments, you can buy gift cards, all kinds of ways to support our really good work, and all of it matters no matter how much or how you donate. So please, before you go, click on that link now, then you can go to the Zoom meeting or go do whatever you're gonna do after this, but all of it would be appreciated. Come back to us next week, because guess what? Next week is Advent. Yeah, that's when we start counting down to Christmas, and it's going to be a great time of exploring what Christmas means, talking about lament and hope, and getting ready to embrace everything that Christmas is. So we'll see you back here next week, same time, same place. But for now, may you go in peace, may you go in love, may you go and do it loudly. We'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.